High Scribe Valerius of the Signin Ascendancy often compared humanity to a chaotic nebula, a swirling mass of unpredictable energies that was beautiful from a distance but utterly lacking in the elegant, symmetrical structure of a true star system. It was a view shared by most within the Lyra Accords, the grand and ancient coalition of species that served as the galaxy's self-appointed custodians. For centuries, the Accords had cultivated peace through a doctrine of carefully managed progress and cultural homogenization, ensuring that no single species could ever achieve a technological or military advantage that might upset the delicate balance. They were gardeners tending to a vast and cosmic bonsai tree, pruning any branch that grew too quickly or in the wrong direction. Humanity, the newcomers from the Sol system, were the most peculiar branch they had yet encountered. They had burst onto the galactic stage a mere 2 centuries prior, a blink of an eye to a Signin whose lifespan could be measured in millennia. The Terrans were a paradox. They possessed a startling ingenuity, capable of art that could make a stone weep and music that echoed the birth of stars. Yet they were also plagued by a history of breathtaking self-destruction. Their archives, which they shared with a perplexing and almost shameless transparency, were filled with tales of global wars, ideological purges, and ecological collapse. To the Accords, humanity was a case study in arrested development, a brilliant but emotionally unstable adolescent who needed firm, benevolent guidance. They were useful as traders of exotic goods, their mercurial nature giving them a knack for finding value where others saw none. And their strangely resilient biology made them excellent pioneers on worlds other species deemed uninhabitable. But a power a threat. The notion was absurd. They were a curiosity, a project, a people to be patiently guided toward the enlightened harmony of the Accords. This paternalistic consensus was precisely why the decision regarding the planet designated HD 40307G, which the humans had audaciously named Eden Prime, was passed with almost no debate. The world was a masterpiece of terraforming, a testament to that chaotic human ingenuity. Over 5 generations, they had transformed a barren super-Earth into a verdant paradise, a world teeming with engineered life that was a vibrant fusion of Earth's lost biomes. It was this very success that sealed its fate. The Accords, in their infinite wisdom, declared Eden Prime a galactic heritage site, a living museum to be preserved in its pristine, human-sculpted state for the benefit of all galactic citizens. The edict was framed not as an eviction, but as an honor. The human colonists, all 70 million of them, were to be relocated to a newer, more suitable settlement. Their emotional attachments to the world they and their ancestors had bled and sweat to create were noted in the official decree as a touching, if primitive, display of territorial instinct. The Accords did not anticipate resistance. They expected gratitude. To ensure a smooth transition, a small peacekeeping flotilla, the Celestial Serenity Cohort, was dispatched under the command of Prelate Kalen, a Signin of impeccable lineage and boundless self-assurance. It was a diplomatic mission, not a military one, its gleaming silver ships designed to inspire awe, not fear. Valerius was in the Great Archives on Cygnus Prime when the edict was announced. He felt a faint, illogical tremor of unease. As a historian, his role was to understand the deep currents of a species' character, and something about this felt wrong. He had spent years studying the Terrans, fascinated by their contradictory nature. He'd read their poetry and their battle plans, listened to their symphonies and their recorded cries of anguish. He saw a people defined not by logic or tradition, but by a terrifyingly potent capacity for belief. When they believed in an idea, whether it was a god, a nation, or a home, They clung to it with a ferocity the long-lived, dispassionate species of the Accords could barely comprehend. He raised his concerns in a private council meeting, suggesting that perhaps a period of extended negotiation would be more prudent. His words were met with polite, dismissive smiles. "My dear Valerius," Prelate Kalen had said, his voice as smooth and cool as polished marble, "you give them too much credit. Their outrage will be loud but brief. They are like children, prone to tantrums but quick to forget when presented with a new toy. We are giving them a new toy. They will accept." Kalen was wrong about the tantrum. Humanity's response was not outrage. It was silence. A profound, unnerving, galaxy-wide silence. The normally vibrant human comms channels, a cacophony of trade chatter, artistic broadcasts, and heated political debates, went utterly dead. The Terran ambassador to the Accords recalled his staff and departed without a word of protest or farewell. On Eden Prime, the colonists did not riot. They did not plead. They simply packed. They gathered their families, their personal keepsakes, their data archives, and they left. Within 3 weeks, 70 million people vanished from a world they called paradise, leaving behind empty cities and silent fields. The Celestial Serenity cohort arrived to find a ghost planet. Prelate Kalen reported it as a stunning success, a testament to the Accords' wise and benevolent authority. The humans had understood their place. They had bowed to the inevitable. But Valerius, watching the reports from his cloistered study, felt the tremor of unease intensify into a cold knot of dread in his core. This was not acceptance. This was something else. This was the quiet before a storm of unimaginable scale. He threw himself into his research, diving deeper into the forbidden sections of the human archives, the raw, unfiltered data streams that the Accord censors had deemed unconducive to galactic harmony. He bypassed the sanitized histories and read first-hand accounts of their ancient conflicts. He learned of a war where they had split the atom not to create energy, but to unleash the fury of a star upon their own cities. He read of another where they had engineered plagues to erase entire populations. The Accord's concept of war was a ritualized affair, a glorified chess match of fleet maneuvers and honorable surrenders, designed to settle disputes with minimal disruption to the galactic order. Humans, it seemed, did not play chess. They overturned the board, set the pieces on fire, and salted the earth where the board had stood. They had a concept for it, a phrase that appeared again and again in their military doctrines: total war. It was not about achieving victory. It was about ensuring the absolute and unconditional annihilation of the enemy's will to fight. It was a philosophy of such brutal finality that it made Valerius's 3 hearts beat with a frantic, alien rhythm. He brought his new findings to the council, his voice strained with an urgency that bordered on panic. He showed them simulations based on humanity's own historical models, projecting the potential outcome of a conflict. The projections were so catastrophic, so utterly one-sided in their destructive scope, that the counselors dismissed them as flawed data, the hysterical output of a malfunctioning algorithm. "They don't have the ships, Valerius," one of them said with a condescending sigh. "Our sensor nets have cataloged their entire fleet. It is a pathetic collection of outdated freighters and barely armed patrol craft. They are no threat." And on that point, the data seemed to agree. The Terran military was, by all conventional metrics, a joke. But Valerius couldn't shake the feeling that they were all looking at the wrong thing. They were searching for a familiar threat, a fleet of warships and legions of soldiers. They were trying to measure a nebula with a ruler, completely oblivious to the black hole forming in its center. Aboard his flagship, the Stellarch's Grace, Prelate Kalen was enjoying his victory. He strolled through the silent, beautiful cities of Eden Prime, his scientific teams cataloging the unique flora and fauna with detached curiosity. The human architecture was impressive, he admitted, though it lacked the sublime, mathematically perfect geometry of Signan design. He saw it all as the clever work of a precocious child, now safely stored away on a shelf. His fleet of 12 silver cruisers hung in a perfect, symmetrical orbit above the planet, a string of pearls against the green-blue marble below. They were the very symbols of the Accord's power, elegant, serene, and absolute. The weeks turned into a month. The silence from the Sol system continued. The galaxy moved on. The minor affair of Eden Prime already fading into a footnote in the grand history of the Lyra Accords. Valerius found himself isolated, his warnings now treated as the obsessive ramblings of a paranoid academic. He watched the live sensor feeds from the Eden Prime system constantly, waiting for the blow he felt certain was coming. And then, it did. It did not come as a fleet. It did not come with the roar of engines or the flash of weapons fire. It came as a flicker on the long-range sensor array, a tiny distortion in space-time at the system's edge. A single object appeared. It was small, no larger than Kalen's personal shuttle, and was shaped like a teardrop, fashioned from a material so black it seemed to drink the starlight around it. It had no visible drive ports, no weapon emplacements, no viewports. It was a perfect, featureless, silent void. The duty officer on the Stellarch's Grace noted its arrival with a yawn, logging it as a probable meteoroid or a sensor ghost. When it began to move purposefully toward the fleet, he hailed it as per standard procedure, his tone laced with boredom. "Unidentified vessel, you have entered a restricted zone of the Lyra Accords. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The teardrop did not answer. It simply continued its slow, inexorable approach. Prelate Kalen was summoned to the bridge, annoyed at being disturbed. He gazed at the small black shape on the main viewer and scoffed. A lone protester, no doubt, some stubborn human who couldn't let it go. Pathetic. Charge the shield emitters to 80%. Show them we are not to be trifled with. The teardrop ship continued its approach until it reached the geometric center of the orbiting Accords fleet. It stopped, and then it pulsed. It was not an explosion of energy. It was the opposite. It was a wave of absolute nullification, a wave of nothing. Valerius was watching the feed from his archive, his breath caught in his throat. On his screen, he saw the 12 pearls of the Celestial Serenity cohort blink out of existence, not explode, just cease. One moment, the ships were there, proud and gleaming. The next, their energy signatures, their communication links, their life support indicators, everything vanished. The physical ships remained, now just dead husks of metal, unpowered and silent, tumbling slowly in their orbits. They had become tombs for the thousands of souls trapped within. The teardrop ship, its work done, did not linger. But before it vanished, it broadcast a single, system-wide message, aimed not at the dying fleet, but at the heart of the Accords, at Cygnus Prime itself. The voice that filled the great chamber of the Accords was that of a calm, unassuming human female, speaking flawless, unaccented High Signan, a language of immense complexity few non-natives ever mastered. Her tone was not angry, not triumphant, not even threatening. It was the weary, patient tone one might use to correct a misbehaving child. "We have turned off your toys, deoys," the voice said, each word a perfectly enunciated shard of ice. "Eden Prime is ours again. Do not return." The transmission ended. The teardrop ship folded space-time and was gone. In the great chamber, A stunned, horrified silence descended. The counselors, the prelates, the architects of galactic peace stared at the dark screen where their finest flotilla had just been so casually and completely neutered. They hadn't been defeated. They had been dismissed. It was not an act of war. It was an act of pest control. Valerius leaned back in his chair, the data slate slipping from his trembling fingers. The cold knot of dread in his core had bloomed into a universe of pure, unadulterated terror. He finally understood. Humanity had never been a chaotic nebula. They had been the quiet, empty space between the stars, watching, learning, and waiting. He looked at the horrified faces of his colleagues and whispered the question that would now haunt the galaxy for the rest of its days. His voice a dry, cracking sound in the sudden silence. What have we done? The silence in the great chamber of the Lyra Accords was a living entity, a crushing weight that smothered all thought and reason. It was broken only by the shuddering, ragged breaths of the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. On the central hollow display, the serene green and blue of Eden Prime continued its silent rotation, now orbited by the 12 perfectly preserved tombs of the Celestial Serenity cohort. The message, that calm, patient, impossibly condescending correction, did not repeat. It didn't need to. It was seared into the consciousness of everyone present. High Scribe Valerius felt a strange, detached calm settle over him, the placid eye of a hurricane of terror. His moment of vindication was tasteless ash in his mouth. He had been right, but being right was meaningless when the apocalypse was at your door. The initial shock began to curdle into a chaotic stew of fear and fury. HFY warlord, a being of crystalline silicon whose species communicated through resonant frequencies, began to vibrate with such violent rage that a fine dust of himself sifted onto the polished floor. A Signan prelate, a cousin of the now-deceased Kalin, pointed a long, trembling finger at Valerius. This is your fault, historian. Your obsession with these primitives gave them ideas. You emboldened them. The accusation was so ludicrous it barely registered. Valerius simply stared back, his ancient eyes filled with a pity that was more insulting than any retort. It was then that a new voice cut through the burgeoning hysteria, a voice like stones grinding together, cold, hard, and devoid of emotion. Silence. The command was not shouted, but it carried an authority that brooked no argument. All heads turned to the shadowy alcove reserved for the Accord's Grand Marshal. From the darkness stepped Iona of the Velisk hegemony. She was a saurian, bipedal and nearly 3 meters tall, her scales the color of obsidian, her eyes twin slits of unblinking yellow gold. The Velisk were a species of pure pragmatists, warriors and engineers who viewed emotion as a critical system flaw. Iona was the culmination of her species' philosophy, a being who had not felt fear or anger in over 3 centuries. She moved to the center of the room, her gaze sweeping over the cowering counselors with undisguised contempt. Prelate Kalin is dead because he was an arrogant fool, she stated, the words dropping like chips of granite. The men and women under his command are dead because this council mistook a predator for a pet. Your pride has been wounded. My concern is the wound that has been dealt to our strategic security. We are, for the first time in 1,000 years, completely blind. She gestured a 3-clawed hand at the hollow display. We know nothing. We do not know what that weapon was. We do not know how it works. We do not know what else they have. We dispatched a diplomatic mission armed for a parade, and it was swatted aside like an insect. The question is not who is to blame. The question is, what is the scale of our ignorance? Iona's cold logic was a bucket of ice water on the room's heated panic. She was right. Their entire understanding of galactic power dynamics had just been rendered obsolete. Valerius found his voice, stepping forward from the periphery. "Grand Marshal, our ignorance is the point." That was the purpose of their demonstration. Iona's golden eyes fixed on him, showing a flicker of something that might have been interest. "Explain, historian." Valerius took a deep breath. "I have studied them. Humanity does not posture. They do not issue threats they cannot back." This was not a challenge. It was a statement of fact. They have established a boundary. The weapon they used is irrelevant. What matters is that they possess a capability so far beyond our own that they did not even feel the need to destroy our ships. They simply turned them off. It was an act of supreme confidence and supreme contempt. A murmur of dissent rippled through the chamber, but Iona silenced it with a raised hand. She continued to stare at Valerius. "You believe they will not attack us now." "I believe," Valerius said carefully, "that they have no desire for war. War, as we know it, is a means to an end territory, resources, influence. They have demonstrated that they can achieve their objective without it. They wanted Eden Prime. They now have Eden Prime. The ball is, as their archaic saying goes, in our court. If we do nothing, they will do nothing. If we retaliate, they will end us." Iona processed this for a long, silent moment. "Unacceptable," she finally rasped. "We cannot allow a single species to hold a weapon of such power. It violates the founding principle of the Accords. Balance must be restored." She turned to the council. "I will lead a fleet, not a cohort of diplomats. The 1st and 3rd Assault Wings. My flagship, the Unblinking Eye, at their head. Our purpose will be threefold. First, to secure the derelict vessels for analysis. Second, to establish a blockade beyond the Eden Prime system to contain this threat. Third, to make it clear that the Accords do not bow to technological terrorism." Her plan was met with a wave of relieved approval. It was action. It felt decisive, but Valerius felt that cold dread return. "Grand Marshal," he pleaded, "you are walking into a trap of your own making. You are playing their game, but you do not know the rules." Iona turned her reptilian head slowly, her golden eyes seeming to pierce right through him. "Then you will accompany me, High Scribe," she said, her voice leaving no room for refusal. "You will be my advisor. You will teach me the rules." The journey to the HD 40307 system was a study in contrasts. Aboard the Unblinking Eye, a monstrous warship that was less a vessel and more a mobile city of death. The mood was tense but professional. 200 of the Accord's most powerful warships, bristling with quantum torpedoes and phased plasma cannons, sliced through hyperspace in perfect, deadly formation. It was a fleet that could pacify a rebellious star sector in a single cycle. Yet, within Iona's private briefing room, Valerius painted a picture of absolute futility. He sat across from the Grand Marshal, a small, frail-looking Signin before a monolithic obsidian statue, and spoke of humanity's history. He told her of their capacity for exponential growth, their disturbing tendency to turn scientific breakthroughs into weapons of unimaginable horror within a single generation. He explained the concept of asymmetric warfare, something the Valisk, with their focus on overwhelming force, had never truly needed to consider. "They knew we would come back," Valerius said, his voice low. "They are counting on it. They did not show us their hand. They showed us a single card, and they expect us to wager our entire civilization against it." Iona listened impassively, her claws steepled before her. "You speak of them as if they are strategic deities." Scribe, they are flesh and blood. They have limits. They have weaknesses. We simply have not identified them yet. Their weakness and their strength are the same. Marshal, Valerius countered. It is their home. They are not conquerors. Look at their history. In 200 years, they have not taken a single inhabited planet by force. They colonize empty worlds, worlds we deemed worthless, and they pour their very souls into them. Eden Prime was not a piece of territory to them. It was their child. We did not attempt to annex a colony. We attempted to kidnap their child. The being that swatted our fleet aside, that was the parent. When they dropped out of hyperspace, the sight was even more unsettling than it had been on the holo display. The 12 silver cruisers of the Celestial Serenity cohort floated in the black, pristine and perfect, caught in the cold, indifferent starlight. There was no debris field, no scorch marks, no signs of battle. It was a graveyard without violence. Iona's orders were precise. A perimeter was established. Long-range scans were initiated on Eden Prime. Teams of engineers in armored environment suits were dispatched to breach the hulls of the derelict ships. The results came back, each one more baffling and disturbing than the last. The planet was quiet. Life signs were minimal, consistent with the native fauna, but there was no technology, no sign of the 70 million colonists having returned. The cities were still empty, and the boarding teams failed. Their cutting lasers, capable of slicing through meters of neutronium alloy, dissipated harmlessly against the ship's hulls. No force they could apply left so much as a scratch. The ships were not shielded. Their very molecular structure seemed to have been rendered inert, impossibly dense. The internal scans were the most chilling. They showed the crews, thousands of them, still at their posts, frozen in the last moment of their lives. No signs of trauma, no biological decay. They were like statues in a museum of the dead. Analysis of the background energy in the system revealed trace elements of an energy field that violated several known laws of physics. It didn't destroy energy. It had, for a fraction of a second, unwritten it. The power cores of the 12 ships had not exploded or overloaded. They had ceased to exist. Their fundamental quantum states collapsed into nothingness, taking the ship's entire energy grid with them. They had not been killed. They had been unplugged from the universe. Iona stood on the bridge of the unblinking eye, staring at the silent fleet of ghosts. For the first time in her life, the Valis Grand Marshal was confronted with a problem that could not be solved by the application of superior force. This was not a military problem, was a philosophical one. How do you fight an enemy who can edit reality? It was at that moment that the message came. It did not appear on the main comms channel. It materialized directly onto the private tactical display built into her command throne, bypassing every military-grade firewall and encryption protocol the Accords possessed, as if they were children's toys. The text bloomed into existence, written in the same flawless high signin. It was not addressed to the Accords or the fleet. It was addressed to her. Grand Marshal Iona, you have come seeking answers. That is a more respectable goal than your predecessors. We will oblige. You seek to understand our weapon. You are asking the wrong question. It was not a weapon. It was a tool. A scalpel used to remove a malignancy before it could spread. Iona's hands tightened on the arms of her throne. She did not reply. She simply read, "Your Accords are built on a flawed premise that balance can be imposed, that peace is a function of enforced technological parity. This is the logic of a zookeeper, not a civilization. You prune and you cull, forcing all life to grow in the shape you deem correct. You call it stability. We call it stagnation. Our philosophy is different. The right to self-determination is absolute. The right to grow, to change, to excel, to fail is sacred. We do not impose our will on others, and we will not have it imposed upon us." The text shifted, the cool, analytical tone taking on a sharper edge. "You took 70 million of our people from their homes. You declared their life's work a museum piece to be gawked at. You did this without negotiation, without consent, under the delusion of benevolent superiority. In our history, there is no greater crime. We did not retaliate against your people. We did not destroy your cities. We surgically removed the offending instrument. Your fleet was the tool of your oppression, so we took it away from you." Iona felt Valerius move to stand beside her, his old eyes reading the text on her screen. His breath hitched. Then, a final message began to form, accompanied by a single, encrypted data packet that began to download itself directly into the flagship's core computer. "You came here to gauge our strength, to see if we were a threat you could manage. Let us end your uncertainty. We are not interested in ruling your galaxy. We have our own work to do, but understand this, Marshal. The tool we used here was a prototype, a simple demonstration of a principle. We want you to see what we have been building while you were busy tending your garden. We offer you this knowledge not as a threat, but as a courtesy, so that you may make an informed decision and never, ever make this mistake again." The download completed. Iona hesitated for a second, then gave the command. On screen, the main view screen flickered, the image of the dead fleet replaced by the data from the packet. It was a live feed, somehow being routed through their own systems. Valerius let out a sound, a choked gasp of pure awe and terror. The image showed a star, a familiar yellow dwarf, Sol, but the star was caged. Encircling it, gleaming with the impossible energies of a captured sun, was a vast, intricate lattice of black, teardrop-shaped ships. There were not hundreds of them. There were thousands, tens of thousands. A swarm of silent, light-drinking scalpels, orbiting their home star like the guardians of a newborn god. They were not a fleet. It was a shield against the rest of the universe. Grand Marshal Iona stared at the screen, her cold, logical mind finally, completely breaking. She had come here to contain a threat, to restore balance, but the feed from Sol was not a threat. It was a revelation. It was the answer to a question no one in the Accords had ever thought to ask. What has humanity been doing for the last 200 years? They had been preparing, not for war, but for their own ascension. She now held a truth that would not just shatter the Lyra Accords, but the entire galactic concept of power. She could broadcast this image, reveal the truth, and plunge every known species into an age of existential dread, bowing forever to a silent, unseen master. Or she could erase the data, report back that the weapon was a one-off anomaly, and lead her people into a blind, suicidal war against a force as fundamental as gravity. Her unblinking golden eyes stared at the caged sun, and for the first time in centuries, Grand Marshal Iona did not know what to do. The caged sun burned into Grand Marshal Iona's mind, an image of such profound and absolute power that it vaporized a millennium of established galactic doctrine. She had built her life, her entire civilization, on the altar of measurable force. An army's strength was the sum of its warships, the yield of its torpedoes, the resilience of its shields. It was a grand, complex equation, but an equation nonetheless. What she was looking at was not a variable in that equation. It was a new form of mathematics. Valerius made a soft, choking sound beside her, the sound of a being witnessing the birth and death of a god in the same instant. On the bridge of the unblinking eye, The Valisk crew remained silent and still, their own pragmatic minds struggling to process the impossible data feed their Grand Marshal had just displayed. They saw the image, but they could not comprehend the implication. Iona could. She saw it with terrifying clarity. It was not a shield. A shield is a passive defense. This was a statement of capability, an infrastructure of annihilation held in perfect, serene reserve. Any one of those teardrop ships could likely do to a planet what its prototype had done to Kalen's fleet. And there were tens of thousands of them, drinking power directly from a star. It was the answer to the question Valerius had posed. What has humanity been doing? They hadn't been building a fleet to fight the Accords. They had been building a tool to reshape reality, and their fleet was merely a byproduct of their true work. Her fingers, still resting on the command throne, twitched. She had 2 commands at her disposal. She could forward this feed to the Accords High Council. The result would be immediate and catastrophic. The Lyra Accords would dissolve overnight, not in fire, but in a whimper. Every species would retreat to its home system, shattering alliances, hoarding resources, and staring into the void, waiting for a master who had no interest in ruling them. The galactic economy would collapse. The long peace would end, replaced by an age of fear governed by a silent, absent god. Or she could give the order to purge the data. She could bury this truth so deep in the unblinking eye's core memory that it would never be recovered. She could return to the council, lie, lead her people, her galaxy, into a glorious, pointless, and utterly final war. The pragmatist in her, the core of her Velisk being, screamed that there was no choice. Survival, at any cost, was the only logical imperative. But she was not just a Velisk, she was the Grand Marshal of the Accords. Her purpose was not merely to survive, but to preserve the order she embodied. To reveal the truth was to concede that the Accords were meaningless. To fight was suicide. A logical paradox. And in that moment of impossible choice, Iona did what no Valisk was supposed to do. She chose a third path, a path not of logic, but of faith. A faith in the one thing she had always disdained deceit. Purge the feed from all systems, she rasped, the words feeling alien in her throat. Designate the source data packet as a corrosive human mimetic virus. All records of its contents are now classified at Omega Prime level, accessible only by myself and the High Scribe. Any crew member who discusses what they saw will be charged with high treason and summarily executed. Is that clear? The bridge commander, a fellow Valisk whose loyalty was absolute, nodded sharply, his own shock hidden behind a mask of discipline. By your command, Grand Marshal. The image of the caged sun vanished from the main screen, replaced once again by the cold, silent tombs of the Celestial Serenity cohort. The secret was now shared by only 2 beings on this side of the galaxy, a warrior who could not accept defeat, and a historian who had already seen the end of the book. Valerius looked at her, his ancient face a mask of disbelief and horror. Marshal, what have you done? Iona turned her golden eyes upon him, and for the first time, Valerius saw something in them beyond cold calculation. It was the faintest glimmer of a terrible, newfound burden. I have bought us time. Scribe, she said, time they so graciously offered us. It would be rude not to use it. The return journey was a funereal procession. The 200 warships of the 1st and 3rd Assault Wings moved with a grim purpose they did not understand. Their orders were to maintain full sensor silence, to avoid all non-essential communications, and to prepare a report stating that the derelict fleet was unsalvageable, locked down by a localized, high-energy stasis field of unknown origin. The lie was simple, elegant, and believable enough to prevent widespread panic. Iona spent the entire transit in her briefing room with Valerius. The room had been transformed into a research cell. Valerius, given full access to the ship's archives, cross-referenced his knowledge of human history with the technical data they had gathered from the dead fleet. He spoke for hours on end, explaining humanity's philosophies, their art, their religions, their paradoxical blend of fierce individualism and profound communal loyalty. He explained that humanity's greatest strength was their mastery of narrative. They lived and died for stories, for ideas. The story of Eden Prime, a home built from nothing and then stolen, was a powerful one. Their response was not just a military action, it was the inevitable conclusion of their own story. Iona did not speak. She listened. She absorbed. She, who had always studied schematics of warships, now studied the poetry of a species that could weep at the death of a fictional character. She, who had memorized the effective ranges of 1,000 weapon systems, now tried to understand a species that had once launched a golden record full of their music and greetings into the void, a message in a bottle thrown into a cosmic ocean, an act of such beautiful, pointless hope that it defied all strategic logic. She began to understand. The Accords saw the galaxy as a machine to be maintained. Humanity saw it as a story to be written, and they would burn any machine that tried to edit their pages. When they arrived back at Cygnus Prime, the High Council was already in session, their fury having festered during the fleet's absence. Iona entered the great chamber alone, her obsidian form a stark silhouette against the gleaming hall. Valerius watched from a secure observation deck, his 3 hearts pounding. "Report, Grand Marshal," the new Cygnan prelate demanded, his voice sharp with anger and grief. Iona stood impassively in the center of the room. "The human weapon is a form of localized reality collapse," she began, her voice a low rumble. "It appears to be a defensive system of immense power but limited range, keyed to their own technology. It rendered our ships inert by collapsing the quantum state of their power sources. We have no defense against it. Furthermore, we have no means of salvaging the disabled ships. They are, for all intents and purposes, impenetrable." A wave of outrage washed over the chamber. A Thar warlord vibrated with fury. "So we do nothing. We allow these mammals to dictate terms to the Lyra Accords. To engage them in conventional warfare would be to throw our fleets into a meat grinder," Iona stated flatly, ignoring the insult. "They have made their home system a fortress. To attack it would be suicide. They have no expansionist ambitions. Their response was punitive, not territorial. They have drawn a line." The prelate sneered. "So your grand fleet, the pride of the Accords, was repelled by a simple planetary defense system. You counsel cowardice. Marshal." Iona's golden eyes narrowed. "I counsel strategy. Brute force has failed. Therefore, we must seek another way. The humans have revealed a weapon, but they have also revealed a mindset. They are reactive, not proactive. They are insular. They value their story above all else. This is not a military problem anymore. It is a cultural one." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I am therefore retasking the 3rd Assault Wing. Their new mandate is not warfare, but intelligence, deep-range surveillance, psychological analysis, cultural infiltration. We will not fight them on their terms. We will learn them. We will find the flaws in their narrative. We will find a weakness that cannot be shielded by technology." She turned her gaze directly to the prelate. "And while we do that, you will do nothing. The Accords will officially censure Earth for its disproportionate response, and then we will engage in a period of cold, Silent observation. Any unauthorized military action against the Sol system or its territories will be considered an act of treason against the Accords. Her declaration hung in the air, an order backed by the implicit threat of the remaining fleet under her direct command. There were grumbles, furious whispers, but no one dared to openly defy her. She had given them an enemy they could comprehend and a strategy that felt proactive, all while secretly steering them away from the cliff of total annihilation. She had saved them, for now, by giving their anger a new, less suicidal direction. Later that cycle, Valerius joined Iona in her private chambers. The Grand Marshal stood before a large viewport, gazing at the star-dusted swirl of the galaxy. "They will not be satisfied for long," Valerius said quietly. "The Warhawks will demand results, proof of this cultural weakness." "I know," Iona replied without turning. "Which is why you will no longer be the High Scribe." Valerius felt a pang of confusion. "Marshal," Iona turned, her expression unreadable. "I am creating a new division, buried so deep within Accord's intelligence that its existence will be known only to the two of us. It will be given a meaningless name, Project Chimera. Its funding will be siphoned from a dozen different black budgets. Its sole purpose will be to answer one question: how do you defeat a god?" Valerius was stunned into silence. "You, Valerius, will be its director," Iona continued. "You will assemble a team not of soldiers or spies, but of historians, philosophers, artists, psychologists, beings from every species. You will study humanity not as an enemy combatant, but as a metaphysical phenomenon. You will find the cracks in their soul. That is the only battlefield where we might stand a chance." In that moment, Valerius saw the sheer, terrifying audacity of Iona's plan. She had accepted the truth of humanity's power, but she refused to accept the finality of it. She was wagering the future of the galaxy not on a war of ships, but a war of belief. It was desperate. It was mad. It was, perhaps, the only move they had left, as he accepted his new, impossible role. A transmission was being monitored deep within the Sol system. Two unseen, unnamed humans observed the encrypted proceedings of the Accord's High Council. They had watched Iona's performance, listened to her lies, and analyzed the subtle inflections in her voice. One of them turned to the other, its form merely a shimmer in the low light of the observation post. "She hid the data," a calm male voice observed. "She chose not to break them." A second voice, the same female voice that had spoken to Prelate Kalen's fleet, replied, "It was the least probable outcome." Her psychological profile suggested a complete cognitive collapse when faced with a no-win scenario. "She's a pragmatist," the first voice mused. "She found a third option." "Yes," the female voice said, a hint of something new in her tone, not triumph, not arrogance, but a deep, academic curiosity. "She chose the interesting path. Begin secondary observation protocols. This new Project Chimera, it may actually be worth watching." The 2 decades that followed were not an era of peace, but an age of profound and unnerving quiet. The galaxy held its breath. On the surface, the Lyra Accords projected an image of stoic resolve. Grand Marshal Iona's official report had been accepted. The Eden Prime incident was the result of a powerful but limited human defensive superweapon. The official policy became one of containment and observation, a galactic Cold War where the primary weapons were spies, economic sanctions, and propaganda. Trade with the human territories trickled but never stopped. A tense and paranoid exchange where every cargo manifest was scrutinized and every freighter captain was suspected of being an intelligence agent. The Accords poured trillions of credits into their own research and development, desperately trying to replicate the reality collapse effect, a futile effort akin to a child trying to build a star by rubbing two sticks together. Beneath this veneer of control, the galaxy was fracturing. The story of Eden Prime had become a myth, a ghost story told in the shadowy corridors of power. Species on the fringes of Accord space began to question the wisdom of an alliance that could be so thoroughly humbled. Quietly opened independent diplomatic channels with the Terrans, seeking not alliance, but simple non-aggression pacts. Humanity, for its part, did nothing to encourage or discourage this. They remained within their borders, twice their ships never crossing the line they had drawn. Their comms channels, once silent, had returned to their chaotic vibrancy, broadcasting art, music, and incomprehensible entertainment. To the casual observer, it was as if they had already forgotten the incident, but Iona knew better. And in the forgotten, hollowed-out heart of a dead moon in an uncharted system, Project Chimera was at work. Mnemosiny Station was not a military base. It was a monastery dedicated to a terrifying new religion. High Scribe Valerius, now Director Valerius, presided over a small, hand-picked team of the Accord's greatest minds, beings chosen not for their loyalty or military prowess, but for their ability to think in ways that were fundamentally alien to the Accord's rigid doctrines. There was Xylo, a Valisk logician who had been Iona's foremost strategic analyst. He had requested a transfer after concluding, with cold, irrefutable mathematics, that a direct conflict with humanity would result in the extinction of all non-humanoid life in the quadrant. His task was to deconstruct human systems, their economics, their politics, their military doctrines, looking for logical inconsistencies. There was Lyra, a Glypton whisperer, a delicate, insectoid creature whose species communicated through a shared empathic field. She could not read minds, but she could feel the emotional resonance left on an object or a piece of media. Her role was to experience humanity's cultural output, their films, their music, their literature, and chart the emotional currents that drove them. And there was Kael, a Fthar Shaper, a member of the crystalline species whose warlord sat on the High Council, but whose caste of artisans saw reality as a set of frequencies to be harmonized. He studied human architecture, engineering, and art, seeing them not as static objects, but as frozen music. And he sought to understand the melody. For 20 years, they immersed themselves in the human condition. They walked through painstaking virtual reconstructions of ancient human cities, from Rome to Tokyo to a city called New York. They listened to everything from Beethoven to a genre of electronic noise called dubstep. They watched thousands of their films, from profound philosophical dramas to crude comedies that left the team utterly bewildered. They were drowning in a sea of contradictions. They discovered a species that could write poetry that would make a Cygnin weep, and then use that same language to justify the systematic slaughter of millions of their own kind. They learned of a people who preached altruism and compassion while simultaneously building economic systems that rewarded ruthless exploitation. They saw heroes who were villains and villains who were victims. Humanity's narrative was not a single, coherent story. It was a billion competing, overlapping, and contradictory stories, all screaming for dominance at the same time. Xylo was frustrated. There is no weakness. He would resonate, his crystalline form vibrating with agitation. Their entire civilization is a critical system flaw, yet it functions. It is a building that should have collapsed 1,000 years ago, but it stands, held up by nothing but the sheer, irrational belief of its occupants. It was Lyra who provided the first real clue. She had been tasked with analyzing a historical archive of what humans called social media, a primitive global communication network. They are not strong despite their contradictions, she whispered into the empathic field, the emotional concept translating into the minds of her colleagues as a wave of profound, weary sadness. They are strong because of them. Their core identity is built not on who they are, but on who they are not. They are the perpetual underdog, the righteous survivor, the victim standing against the bully. Their greatest moments of unity, their most terrifying technological leaps, have always come when they feel their backs are against the wall. We gave them the greatest gift imaginable when we took Eden Prime. We gave them a villain. We became the unifying force for their entire species. This breakthrough coincided with a crisis. On the border of human space, in a sector known as the Viridian Expanse, a human colonization project had gone dark. The planet, a gas giant designated Viridia 4, had been the site of a massive atmospheric mining and terraforming operation, home to a floating city colony of 5 million souls. All communications ceased without warning. Then, long-range sensors from an Accord's listening post detected a massive, anomalous energy bloom from the planet's core, followed by a complete gravitational collapse. The planet had, for all intents and purposes, imploded. The war party within the High Council, led by a charismatic and ambitious new prelate named Orcs, seized the opportunity. This was the proof they needed. Humanity was not infallible, and their technology was dangerous and unstable. This was not an act of war, Orcs argued in a fiery speech before the council, but a humanitarian crisis that threatened the stability of the entire sector. He demanded that a fleet be sent, not to attack, but to investigate and contain the threat. It was a political masterstroke. Iona could not refuse without looking weak and ineffectual. Her policy of containment, a proven failure. She was forced to authorize the mission, knowing full well it was a pretext. Oryx would lead the fleet himself, and he would be looking for any excuse to provoke a response, to finally draw the Terrans into a conventional battle where he believed the Accord's superior numbers would prevail. Iona gave him his fleet, but she also gave Project Chimera a deadline. "Find me a weapon," her message to Valerius stated, cold and direct. "Find me something I can use before that fool Oryx ends the galaxy." The pressure was immense. The team on Minamazani Station worked without rest. Valerius pushed them to synthesize Lyra's breakthrough with their own research. If humanity's strength came from their narrative as the righteous underdog, how could that be turned against them? Kael, the Efthar Shaper, found the next piece of the puzzle while studying their mythology and religion. "Their stories always have an external source of power," he chimed, his frequencies creating a complex harmonic of revelation. A divine being, a magical artifact, an ancient prophecy. They are uncomfortable with the idea that their power is their own. It must be bestowed. It must be given. They call it faith. Xylo, the logician, connected the dots. His claws clicked rapidly on his console. A logical fallacy, but a consistent one. They require an external validation for their own exceptionalism. Therefore, the most devastating attack would not be on their infrastructure, but on their validation. We cannot prove they are not exceptional. But what if we could prove that their exceptionalism was not their own? The idea coalesced in the center of the room, a concept of such terrifying, beautiful cruelty that it left them all breathless. It would be a weapon made not of energy or matter, but of pure information, a mimetic payload, a single, perfectly crafted lie, wrapped in a mountain of fabricated but plausible evidence. The lie was this: humanity was not a naturally evolved species that had achieved sentience on its own. They were an experiment, an ancient, Forgotten species, one of the legendary progenitors rumored to have seeded the galaxy with life eons ago, had chosen Earth as a laboratory. Human ingenuity, their art, their resilience, their very soul. It was all the result of careful genetic and social engineering. Their ascension was not a triumph of the will, but the successful completion of another species' long-forgotten thesis project. This lie would not just shatter their underdog narrative, it would annihilate it. They were not David fighting Goliath, they were a prize-winning pig, fattened for a galactic fare they never knew existed. Their defiance against the Accords was not a noble struggle for freedom, it was a pet acting out. Their entire history, every sacrifice, every triumph, every drop of blood and tears shed, would be rendered meaningless. It was cultural genocide in its purest form. Valerius looked at the faces of his team, at the terrible, brilliant weapon they had just conceived. He felt a profound sickness in all three of his hearts. He had spent his life studying history, and he knew that a people stripped of their story, of their meaning, would not simply surrender. They would shatter. They would turn on each other. They would collapse into a nihilistic madness, a species of fallen gods armed with the power to unwrite reality. He sent the proposal to Iona, his transmittal encoded with the highest possible security. It was not a recommendation. It was a warning. Later that cycle, the Grand Marshal's reply came. It was a single word: build it. The fleet of prelate Orcs, 100 warships named for concepts like glory, vengeance, and righteous fury, arrived in the Viridian expanse to find not a disaster, but a wound in the fabric of reality. The gas giant Viridia 4 was gone. In its place was a roiling, chaotic vortex of space-time, a gravitational scar that twisted starlight into screaming, kaleidoscopic patterns. Debris, what little there was, didn't drift. It fell into and out of existence, caught in a temporal feedback loop. It was a sight of such cosmic violence that it should have inspired awe and terror. To Orcs, it inspired only ambition. He stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Righteous Fury, his silver signin features sharp with predatory glee. Unstable, he declared to his bridge crew, his voice ringing with the certainty of a zealot. Their power is a wild, untamed beast that has turned on its master. They are not gods. They are reckless children who have finally burned themselves. This is not a tragedy. It is an opportunity. He saw his path to glory laid bare. He would be the one to expose humanity's weakness, to shatter the myth of their invincibility. His fleet was a spear, and he would plunge it into the heart of the wounded beast. Grand Marshal Iona watched this unfold from her command center on Cygnus Prime. Every sensor feed, every communication from Oryx's fleet was routed to her private display. Beside it, another window remained open, a single, ominous icon representing the mimetic payload of Project Chimera. The weapon was built, uploaded to a swarm of cloaked microdrones already positioned deep within the Sol system's comms network, ready to be unleashed with a single command from her. She watched Oryx, a fool playing with forces he could not comprehend, and felt the cold, pragmatic core of her Velisk nature surge. The lie was the logical choice. Unleash it. Humanity would crumble from within. Oryx's fleet would find a self-immolating enemy, and the Accords would rise from the ashes, their dominance secured for another 1,000 years. It was the winning move. Aboard Minamazani Station, Valerius and his team could only watch the same feeds, their work complete, their souls heavy with the burden of what they had created. Lyra, the empath, had retreated into a meditative trance, unable to bear the emotional potential of the genocide they had enabled. Xylo, the logician, endlessly reran the probability models, which all pointed to the same conclusion: deploying the weapon was the optimal path to victory. But Valerius watched, and he prayed to the forgotten gods of his ancestors that Iona had learned the same lesson he had from humanity's stories, that some victories cost more than any defeat. In the Viridian expanse, Oryx gave the order: target the anomaly's event horizon. A single volley of disruption torpedoes. I want to see how their fortress responds to a knock on the door. It was a deliberate, calculated act of aggression, a flagrant violation of Iona's direct orders, but one he knew she could not punish without revealing her own political weakness. The torpedoes launched, silver streaks against the churning chaos. They never reached their target. As if summoned from the void, a dozen of the black, teardrop ships materialized between the fleet and the anomaly. There was no grand entrance, no flash of light. They were simply there, but they did not fire. They did not raise shields. Instead, one of them pulsed, not with the null energy wave that had disabled Kalen's fleet, but with something far more precise. On the bridge of the Righteous Fury, every light went out. Every system died. The crew was plunged into absolute darkness and silence, but they were not dead. They were not even adrift. The ship remained perfectly still, but outside the viewports, the stars had vanished. The rest of Oryx's fleet was gone. The chaotic vortex was gone. There was only blackness, an absolute, featureless, and eternal nothing. Oryx screamed orders into the dead air, his voice a thin, useless sound in the oppressive silence. A message then appeared, not on a screen, but etched in lines of soft, phosphorescent light directly onto the viewport before him. A message for his eyes only. Prelate Oryx, you came seeking a war, but war is a dialogue between equals. We have nothing to say to you. Your ambition is a malignancy. We have excised it. You and your crew will not be harmed. You will simply be put away. A museum piece, a lesson in a bottle for those who mistake curiosity for aggression. The light faded. The Righteous Fury and its 5,000 crew members were gone from the universe, placed in a stasis bubble, a pocket of space-time completely disconnected from the whole. They had not been destroyed. They had been archived. Back in normal space, the remaining 99 ships of Oryx's fleet floated in stunned disarray. Their leader, their flagship, had simply vanished without a trace. And then the true message from humanity came, broadcast on all Accords channels. A voice calm and clear, the female voice that now haunted the dreams of every leader in the galaxy. This has gone on long enough. In her command center, Iona's clawed hand froze over the icon for Project Chimera. The voice continued, echoing through the Great Chamber, through Namazani Station, through every ship and settlement in the Accords. The event at Viridia 4 was not an accident. It was a failure. We are not gods. We are apprentices. We were attempting to build a gateway, a stable, traversable passage through folded space. We miscalculated the energy required to sustain it within a gas giant's gravity well. The wormhole collapsed, and it took our city, our people, and the planet with it. 5 million souls were lost. It was our mistake, our tragedy. We are mourning our dead. The admission was a thunderclap that shook the foundations of the galaxy. It was not a boast of power or a threat of retaliation. It was a confession of fallibility, a statement of loss delivered with a profound and weary gravity. It was more terrifying than any weapon. To be an apprentice to godhood meant that one day the apprenticeship would end. The voice concluded, its tone shifting from mourning to a cold, hard finality. We have tolerated your fear, your posturing, and your spies. We have allowed you to believe what you wished. No more. Your Accords are a cage of your own making, built to stifle growth you fear. We will not be caged. We have demonstrated our patience. We have now demonstrated our precision. This is the last lesson we will offer. Stay out of our way. The broadcast ended. The teardrop ships in the Viridian expanse vanished. The leaderless, terrified fleet of prelate Orcs began a long, silent retreat. Across the galaxy, the age of quiet uncertainty was over. The age of absolute, terrifying certainty had begun. Iona stared at the screen, her golden eyes wide. She looked at the icon for Project Chimera, the beautiful, perfect lie that could have won her a war and damned the galaxy. She saw it now for what it was, a zookeeper's tool, a clever trick to control an animal she did not understand. But humanity was not an animal. They were the future, in all its terrible and glorious potential. With a final and decisive movement, she accessed her deepest command protocols and sent a single encrypted command to the microdrones in the Sol system, a self-destruct sequence. Then she sent another message, this one to Director Valerius. Destroy the research. All of it. Project Chimera is terminated. On Minamazani Station, a wave of profound, collective relief washed through the team. Valerius personally oversaw the deletion of every file, every simulation, every piece of the cultural poison they had brewed. As the last file erased, he looked out at the starfield. Their project had not been to build a weapon. He understood now. Iona had tasked them with understanding humanity's soul. And in doing so, they had discovered their own. The Lyra Accords did not collapse, but they were forever changed. Led by Grand Marshal Iona, they slowly, painfully began to transform. The doctrine of enforced parity was abandoned, replaced by a new, humbler philosophy of respectful distance and non-interference. They were no longer gardeners, but observers, watching from afar as their neighbors built new realities. Iona and Valerius met one last time, years later, in the quiet solitude of the Great Archives. We chose the interesting path, Valerius said, echoing the words of the unseen human observer from so long ago. We chose the difficult path, Iona corrected, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. To live alongside a power that could erase you with a thought, it requires a different kind of strength, not of arms, but of character. And they stood together, a warrior and a historian, looking at a new galactic map. On it, the territory of the Lyra Accords was vast and well-defined, but at its edge lay the human systems, a small, unassuming cluster of stars labeled simply Sol. It was no longer a border to be defended or a problem to be solved. It was a silent, constant reminder that the universe was infinitely larger and more mysterious than their philosophies had ever dreamed. And humanity, the chaotic nebula, continued their work, not as conquerors or rulers, but as artists. Their canvas, the very fabric of space-time. Their tools, the forces of creation. Their story just beginning. The galaxy did not cower. It watched, and it waited, and it wondered.